At exactly 1:03 a.m., her phone screen glowed in the darkness like a desperate heartbeat, the call button trembling under her thumb as if it knew what was at stake. Her breath came in uneven bursts, her fingers cold, her mind racing with a single terrifying thought: what if no one answered again? The silence outside her window felt heavier than the night itself, pressing in on her chest, swallowing every ounce of hope she had left. She had already called 3 numbers. 3 times, the line rang into nothingness. And now, with tears blurring her vision, she made one last call, not knowing that this time, everything was about to change. Before we go further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of strangers showing up when it matters most, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel Echoes the Stories. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that need them. Her name was Ariba Hassan, a 26-year-old freelance illustrator who had built her life quietly, carefully, and mostly alone. She lived in a small rented apartment on the edge of the city, where the streets grew quieter after sunset and neighbors rarely exchanged more than polite nods. That night had started like any other, soft music in the background, sketches scattered across her desk, a half-finished cup of tea cooling beside her. But somewhere between midnight and the early hours, something shifted. A faint noise outside her door turned into a series of deliberate footsteps. Then a knock. Not loud, not urgent, just enough to send a chill down her spine. At first, she ignored it, convincing herself it was nothing. But the knock came again, slower this time, more intentional. Her heart began to pound. She checked the peephole, but the corridor was dim, the angle unclear. A shadow moved, then disappeared. That's when fear began to take shape, not loud or dramatic, but quiet and suffocating. She locked every bolt on her door, turned off the lights, and sat frozen in the corner of her living room, clutching her phone like a lifeline. She called her closest friend first. No answer. Then her cousin. Still nothing. Panic tightened its grip. The footsteps returned, pacing just outside her door. The knock came again, followed by a soft scrape, like something being dragged. Her mind spiraled with possibilities, each one worse than the last. And then, in a moment of desperation, she dialed a number she barely remembered saving. It belonged to someone she had met only once, months ago, during a community art workshop. A man who had helped her carry her supplies to her car, who had smiled kindly, who had said, "If you ever need help, don't hesitate." His name was Faris Qadri. Faris was a 34-year-old single father, raising his 8-year-old son, Zion, in a modest home across town. Life had not been easy for him. After losing his wife in a tragic accident years earlier, he had learned to navigate grief while holding together a world for his child. His days were filled with work, school runs, cooking, and bedtime stories. His nights were usually quiet, spent catching up on sleep or planning the next day. But that night, something stirred him awake before the phone even rang, as if instinct had reached out before sound did. When his phone lit up with an unfamiliar number, he hesitated only for a second before answering. On the other end, he heard nothing at first, just breathing, shallow and uneven. Then a voice, barely above a whisper, trembling with fear. She couldn't form full sentences. Her words came in fragments, scattered and broken. But it was enough. Enough for Faris to understand that someone, somewhere, was not safe. Without asking too many questions, without weighing the risks, he got out of bed, grabbed his keys, and left a note beside Zion's pillow. He didn't know exactly what he was walking into, but he knew one thing: he couldn't ignore that voice. The drive felt longer than usual. The streets were empty, the city wrapped in a quiet that felt almost unnatural. Faris followed the location she had managed to send, his grip tight on the steering wheel, his mind alert. When he reached her building, he noticed the flickering hallway light through the glass entrance. The silence inside was heavy, broken only by the echo of his footsteps as he made his way up the stairs. Outside her apartment, he paused. The door was locked, but there was something unsettling in the air, a stillness that didn't feel right. He knocked gently, announcing himself. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the door opened just enough for a pair of frightened eyes to meet his. Ariba looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her face was pale, her hands shaking. But when she saw him, something shifted, relief, disbelief, maybe even a flicker of hope. She let him in, quickly locking the door behind him. The rest of the night passed in a blur of quiet reassurance and cautious observation. Ferris checked the apartment, the windows, the corridor outside. There was no one there anymore, no sign of who, or what, had been causing the disturbance. But the fear lingered, etched into Ariba's expression, refusing to fade. He stayed. Not because he had to, but because he understood what it meant to feel alone in a moment that demanded presence. They didn't talk much. There was no need for long explanations or dramatic exchanges. Sometimes, comfort comes not from words, but from simply not being alone. As the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, the world outside began to wake up. Birds chirped softly, the distant hum of traffic returned, and the darkness that had once felt suffocating began to lift. Ariba sat by the window, watching the sky change colors, her breathing finally steady. Daylight brought clarity, but it also brought questions. Who had been outside her door? Why had they left? And why had no one else answered her calls? But more than anything, she found herself thinking about the man sitting quietly across the room, sipping tea he had made in her kitchen as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Ferris didn't ask for anything in return. He didn't make a big deal out of what he had done. To him, it was simple: someone needed help, and he showed up. But to Ariba, it meant everything. It was a reminder that even in the darkest hours, when the world feels indifferent and distant, there are still people who choose to care. In the days that followed, something unexpected began to grow between them. Not something rushed or forced, but something quiet and genuine. A friendship built on trust, on shared understanding, on the simple act of being there when it mattered most. Ferris introduced her to Zion, whose laughter brought a warmth into her life she hadn't realized she was missing. Ariba, in turn, found herself stepping out of her solitude, slowly reconnecting with a world she had kept at a distance. The fear of that night didn't disappear overnight. There were still moments when shadows felt too long, when silence felt too loud. But now, she wasn't facing them alone. She had someone she could call, not out of desperation, but out of connection. Weeks turned into months, and the memory of that 1 a.m. call became something more than just a moment of fear. It became a turning point. A reminder that sometimes, the people who change our lives aren't the ones we've known forever, but the ones who choose to answer when everyone else doesn't. And maybe that's the quiet truth this story leaves behind, that kindness doesn't need to be grand or perfect. It just needs to be present. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of the power of showing up for someone, take a moment to like, share, and leave a comment. Your engagement helps keep stories like this alive. And before we reach the end, here's a special request: comment below the word hope if you believe that even the smallest act of kindness can change someone's life. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person, one answer, one moment, to turn fear into something beautiful.